Marvel Snap may finally have some competition, which means there are a ton of hot takes for us to talk about. Let's get into it. Ego is a horrible location, and auto-snapping it is dumb in basically every conceivable scenario. At least, it's incredibly rare. So we're going to start out with this one because I don't know if you know this, but there's a take that I've been dying to get out, and I am going to die on this hill in this video. Snap on Ego is bad for Ego and bad for the game, and I'll tell you why. Snap on Ego takes a location that many people think has no skill to it and makes it actually have no skill to it. Now, what do I mean by that? What Ego is doing is removing your ability to play cards to position them in the way you want to. That's obviously bad for many decks, but it's worse for decks that need to do specific things. It's worse for Phoenix Force. It's worse for Destroy. Ego doesn't understand that you want a bunch of big multiple men. Ego doesn't understand that you want to be bouncing your Deadpool a bunch. It doesn't understand that. Decks that have specific play patterns that result in larger outcomes are not good on Ego. Decks that are easily able to be played out, curve-out decks, Wiccan decks, they are good on Ego. There is a relative difference there. And I think people don't understand that when you say snap on Ego, what you're doing is disadvantaging everyone who isn't playing a deck that Ego is good to, or is functional with, or more functional with. Snapping is the only part of Ego in which there is skill expression. And that skill expression is recognizing what your deck does, and what your opponent's deck does, and whether or not you are favored in the situation that Ego will create. And that kind of skill expression is actually pretty unique among locations in Marvel Snap. It's not the most fun thing in the world to have to do that, but it is skill expression. It is taking the game and saying, all right, now the only thing that matters is the stakes. Let's see what you can do when the only way to express your skill is by snapping and retreating. When you introduce this social contract snap on Ego thing, it sucks. It's bad, because then you take a location that has a small portion of skill expression and you delete all the skill expression from that location. It becomes purely is your deck better on this location than your opponent's is? No, you can't retreat. Sorry, you're not allowed to mitigate your loss. You're not allowed to cleverly recognize that and leave the game. You have to stay in for 8 because of this. I think it's terrible. I think that social contract not only takes things away from the game, it takes things away from Ego as a whole as well. I think Ego is a location that people would like more if they didn't do that. And I think back to when this social contract developed and why it developed. And I think honestly what happened is people looked at Ego and were like, oh, the game's full random. Let's just go full stakes. But it's not full random. You have control over the snap and the retreat buttons. And they don't get that that is a skill. And that pretending that it isn't a skill disadvantages certain decks and certain playstyles when Ego shows up. And I think that's bad. Hela shouldn't have been nerfed. I disagree. I think my issues with Hela are sort of well documented. They're the same as the issues I would have with Bounce and do have with Bounce, but they are sort of more pronounced with Hela because there is less effort going into actually working towards creating the conditions for you having a large amount of unaccountable power on turn 6. With Bounce, you are at least taking a bunch of game actions to get you moving towards that situation where you have a lot of power on 6. With Hela, you are playing Lady Sif and Blade and Hellcow, and that is kind of it. Like, you are doing things that are fairly rudimentarily, fairly simple, fairly straightforward. And for the record, the one upside that I think Hela has as an archetype is that it is easy to play, that it is something that everyone can pick up and play, and that it is mostly a Series 3 deck. I think those things are actually very good. And those are the only things that are keeping me this time around from going as hard as I was on Hela the last time around, right? Also, it is a little bit more balanced than it was last time. I can't really argue with that. But I do think that Hela is the kind of archetype that creates people not having a lot of fun. And not necessarily not just not having a lot of fun, but very visibly not feeling like their actions matter. When I lose against Bounce, a lot of it is, I guessed wrong. I put the wrong power in the wrong location. I could have won this game, but I didn't. When I lose against Hela, it's not you guessed wrong. There's no interplay between you and your opponent. It's just, oh, their stuff went where it went. and it was the bad location for me. I didn't guess anything. There was no guessing there. I didn't have any way to really understand what their output range was in any given location. It's just like, oh, it happened. Okay. My opponent didn't really make any smart decisions. It just sort of happened that way. And I think that is the thing that I think people object to with Hela the most. It's that feeling of, it doesn't even feel like you're playing against a person. You're just playing against the deck. And I think that, if anything, is the kind of thing that I would try if I were on the balance team to not be one of the top tier decks in my game. I don't know exactly if they ever do this, to be honest with you. Like, I think they use sentiment as like a thing that can push things over the top, but they're not going to nerf a bad card just because everyone's playing it. Or just because everyone hates it. I think that it's going to be a lot more about like actual play rate, actual win rate. I don't really get the sense that they nerf stuff just because it's hated. It's always like, you know, this is 20% of the metagame and we're not happy with that. This is a 55% win rate and we're not happy with that. Stuff like that is what actually gets stuff nerfed. And I think people sort of reverse it a little bit where they're like, oh, well, people complain about this, so it got nerfed. I don't really think that's how it works. I think it's the other way around. I think the thing is worth complaining about because it is nerfable. Alliances has done more to burn players out than to make them interested in playing. I obviously can't speak to this without actually having any data, but I can talk about my anecdotal experiences with alliances, which is that they sucked, and I hate doing their quests, and they make me sad. And I think that there are two fundamental factors in why that is. Number one is, I want to, when I play Marvel Snap, I want to have the experience that I signed up for, which is to say, I want to make a deck, and I want to make my deck decisions based on what I feel like playing, and what I want to be doing that day, and what I want to experiment with. And the quests are always telling you, no, actually, what you want to do is you want to go play Move. And here, we're going to add like this 5% incentive for you to play Move. But it's not actually like a 5% incentive, because suddenly there's like a social contract where it's like, oh, you're not pulling your weight in this alliance. Oh, you're not actually helping unless you make a time sacrifice of the gameplay you wanted to have and go play something else instead. I think that's bad. And the second reason is that the goals are very high and they're sort of balanced around 30 people. And that makes me feel like if you have less than 30 people in your alliance, you're not getting anything out of the system. So they've made a system that is not fun for people who play the game a lot, me, and is also balanced around having a full alliance in a way that I think would be very unpleasant if you didn't try to have a full alliance. And that kind of seems bad if you're gonna ask me. That seems like a really bad system. I think on the whole, the concept of alliances is cool. It was very good when the quests are easy and they're things you can do while doing what you want to do in the game. I think that's fine. When the quests are bad, and this happens all the time, like I'll look at our alliance quests and there will be 0 quests that I can do while just playing normal Marvel Snap. It'll be like 5 move and discard and destroy quests, and then like 3 pairs of cards that nobody can actually play together. It sucks. I think that's bad. And I don't really know exactly how to fix it, but like it's just so consistently a system that I don't want to engage with in any way, because what I want to do when I play Marvel Snap is I want to make a deck and I want to be like, all right, I'm going to go play Darkhawk today. I'm going to go play Arishem today. I'm going to go play Clog today. That's what I want to do. And I don't want this thing saying, actually, you're a bad friend if you don't play the Collector today. I didn't want to play the Collector. Get off my back. Switching sides should count as moving. Green Goblin in a lane with Kingpin should change sides and also get the penalty. I mean, this would be a pretty crazy buff to Scream if it took an extra 2 power off of every goblin you put on there. I'm not opposed to this necessarily, but it does seem like a little bit needlessly confusing, right? I think switch sides is a word that describes the action, and coding it to be counted as moving in order to buff Scream and Kingpin, while it would buff Scream and Kingpin, is not something that I super love. What's interesting to me is, like, doesn't that currently work with Professor X? And if so, why does that work? I guess my thought process is that they should probably clean that up. I personally am of the opinion that you could do this, but I don't know if it would be worth the hit to confusion that you get when a new player comes up. And I think if you did do this, you would want to change all the sort of wording on this, right? Like you could make the mechanical change, but you would also have to make a wording change to Green Goblin so that it says move to your opponent's side of the board, to Hobgoblin so it says move there, right? And then they'd also have to like work with Craven, wouldn't they? It'd be like some interesting interactions that you'd be adding in here. There honestly would. I do worry. I think my one worry about this is I do think that it might imply incorrectly, but I can see a new player seeing this is like, oh, if I move my stuff too far to the left, I'm gonna move them right onto my opponent's board. And I realize it's like a not real thing, and they'll figure that out. But it is like the kind of thing where it's like, maybe we shouldn't give that impression. I don't know. Basically, I think you could do this, and I'd like to see Scream and Kingpin buffed in that way. But I don't know if it would be worth the potential confusion hit that comes with it. The only thing that prevents players from hitting infinite is skill issue, which includes cube management. It's not the only thing. It's probably the major thing. But, I mean, it's usually going to be some combination of skill times time, right? Like, you're not going to hit infinite if you only play one game a season. I think we figured that out, right? There is a minimum number of games you will have to play to hit infinite. That's pretty normal, right? But I do think on the whole, for most people who are saying, you know, I play a lot, I don't hit infinite, yeah, I mean, it's going to be a skill issue, or it could be like a deck selection issue, but deck selection is skill, right? Like, I think ultimately my advice to people who want to hit infinite and don't understand that they can't hit infinite, don't understand about why they're not being able to do it, don't understand why it takes them so long, things like that. My advice isn't just like get good, but like really think about what's happening in the game as it's happening. What does your opponent's turn one play suggest about what they're trying to do? What does their turn two play suggest about what they're trying to do? What is the game plan they're trying to execute? What does you beating that game plan look like? What tools does your deck have to beat what you expect them to be able to do? What is their big turn six play, and how are you going to manage that? I think thinking about things like that is probably the best thing that you can do to get better at this game. I also think that focusing more on playing just like a really good deck and less on experimenting might be helpful as well to players in this situation. I think a lot of people focus on, you know, cube management and all of that stuff. It matters, obviously, but I can tell you that the best cubes I've been on my life, like the best runs of cubes I've been on my life, have been because I'm winning a lot, right? Like, cube management is obviously helpful. You know, like, don't stay in lost games. Retreat when you have to. Don't get your ego tied up in the game. Be willing to retreat. Absolutely, right? However, on the whole, Marvel Snap is still a card game. So card game skills are definitely going to apply here. And thinking about what your opponent is doing is like the basic card game skill that you're going to have to develop, which is, here is my game plan. Here is my opponent's game plan. I'm going to have a better and better idea of my opponent's game plan as the game goes on. How do I win? How does my game plan match up into that? What does me winning look like? And how do I get to that board state? Cerebro always seems to be a deck that needs more help. Yeah, new card comes out, let's put it into Cerebro. But what if Cerebro was +3 instead of +2? This might be the other take that I have that's like unpopular enough to go in one of these videos. I don't think Cerebro is that interesting of a deck. I think Cerebro's secretly a stats deck that pretends to be different because it's mostly been bad. People think of Cerebro as a rogue deck, and it's a rogue deck in the sense that it's not very good, but that doesn't make you a rogue deck or an interesting deck. I think there's this thing in card game communities where people conflate like, oh, this deck's not very good, so it must be really cool, right? That's why people play it. And it's like, you know, all Cerebro decks are pretty much just, you know, statsy mid-range decks. That's what they are. They're statsy mid-range decks with a lot of additional fragility in them. I wouldn't want to give it +3. I think that'd be really bad, actually. Like, I think that that's not a very fun type of deck to promote. Like, I play a lot of statsy mid-range decks. Most of the time, people don't like it when that's the best deck, I feel like. And I don't really think that Cerebro, like, here's my hottest take of this, all right? Cerebro gives me Hela vibes, where the fun is the deck building. Like, this is a card that makes no sense when you get it, and you're just like, whoa, I'm collection level 1500. How do I make this card sick? And that's super cool, right? Like that, when you don't have every card in the game, when you're not trying to compete, that's really, really cool. It's a cool thing to do. But when you have every card in the game, when all of these net deck tools are available, the deck building cool bit of it gets kind of thrown out with the bathwater. And so everyone kind of knows, like, okay, well, this is what Cerebro 3 looks like. This is what Cerebro 2 looks like. It's just the statsy mid-range deck. Here's the numbers. Did you draw Cerebro or not? I don't know. And it's like, I don't think that's very fun. I'm going to be honest with you. I think that Cerebro decks are overrated as far as like being fun and interesting or anything like that. I don't think they're very fun. And I don't think they should go to +3 because then it's like, okay, cool. Now you're just doing the same thing you were doing, except it's good now. Is that good? Like, I think that if I liked the way they promoted their gameplay, if I liked the gameplay of a Cerebro deck more, I would say that. But I don't think people evaluate Cerebro decks on gameplay. I think it's like a status symbol. I think it's like, hey, check out how well I'm doing with this crap, rather than it is like, oh, I am actually doing something unique and weird in this space. And I think that Cerebro would actually get less special if it was good. I think it should be what it is right now. Because the longer people don't realize that it's not actually that interesting, the better for the card. Perhaps not a hot take since everyone loves Jeff, but I think he's become significantly less relevant since Professor X isn't a thing anymore and War Machine's buff has made it even more so. My proposal, make it so Jeff can move every turn, busted, ? Or make it so Jeff can't be reduced. That would be busted, yes, if it could move every turn. I think that would be like a really, really, really interesting card, but I don't think they should ever make it. I don't think Jeff needs a buff. It's not normal for a card to have 40% meta share, and Jeff has been near 50 at some points in the past, and I think that's a mistake that represents a mistake more than anything else, right? Like, I think the fact that you're suggesting this shows that people have gotten used to the status quo of like, oh, Jeff is just really good everywhere, and now that he's not literally the best card in the game, people are like, you need to buff him. That seems ridiculous to me. If anything, Jeff was a design mistake that released too high and then stayed too high because there's no real good ways to nerf him. And I think that on the whole, it's probably a good thing that there are now 2-drops that do totally different things that are playable now. That you can do things like scale with your 2-drops. That there's more Angelas in the game. There's Angela, there's Thena, there's Scream. I think that's awesome, right? Because it used to just be Angela and Jeff. Like, that's really, really bad. But now that there's more competition for that 2-drop slot, White Widow, for example, Kate Bishop, right? There's just more cards that want to go in there. Jeff was the best 2-drop by virtue of other 2-drops being bad. And the fact that there's not really a good nerf to him, I think rather than saying, oh, we need to make this card better so that it's now the best 2-drop again, I think it's good that there is now no clear cut, this is the best 2-drop of all time, because they've made like 5 good 2-drops in the last year. And that's probably the right way to approach this. Content creators as a whole really whiffed bad last month, from overhyping SSM and Scarlet Spider to drawing attention to a Hela deck that didn't have a top win rate, but that Hela deck got nerfed because of the attention instead of something like Clog. Okay, so whenever people say, I made a rule about these kind of things where it's like people are like naming content creators. Because if you leave this in my comments, I'm going to assume, content creator, you're talking about me. So I'm going to issue a defense of myself here. Yeah, no, I overrated Scarlet Spider. Absolutely. That's not really an issue. I overrated Symbiote Spider-Man, I think. But I actually think that when you look through my content, you see me talking about, like, if you look at the 8 cubes before Scarlet Spider released, the conversation is focused on, I'm not sure this card has a home right now. I think this card is very strong, but I don't think it has a home right now. It came out, it's strong, but it doesn't have a home. I was exactly, like, not exactly right about that, but, like, I think I was pretty close to being on base about Scarlet Spider the closer it got to actually being out, and as I was more able to assess the conditions it was able to release into. The bit about Hela, where it's like I swear to God, there's one of these in here every time that pisses me off. I don't get things nerfed. You guys actually think that because I make a video about how much I hate something, the second dinner balance team, much smarter than me, is like, you know, KM hates this, we should really nerf it? Dude, no, that's just not how it works. I don't get things nerfed. I don't have that power. Even if I worked for them and I was like, huh, you know what? I'd really like you guys to nerf Hela. They'd probably be like, why? It's got a win rate that's not very good. Like, I really don't know what else to say about this other than, like, you guys have your cause and effect wrong. They don't nerf stuff because KM Best or Cozy or Alex or Jeff Hoagland gets mad at it. Because, spoiler alert, those people have a lot of takes on this game and not all of them are right, including me. It would be insane for them to do that. Drawing attention to the Hela deck, it was very good and very easy, and it was like 20% of the metagame. What do you mean I drew attention to it? It was like the most played deck in the game when I made that video. I didn't draw attention to shit. And like this attitude of like, it's the content creator's fault that a card got nerfed. What are you talking about? I wish they nerfed the stuff I wanted to nerf and buffed the stuff I wanted to buff. They don't do that. Like, I cannot be more clear about this. I am not getting your cards nerfed. I'm sorry. Putting so many cool new cards next to bad/mid spotlight cards till December makes me think Second Dinner doesn't see Pocket as a major competitor. Pocket won't kill Snap, but it'll rock SD more than we think. I'm gonna start at the bottom here, which is, I agree, actually. I'm not gonna play Pokemon Pocket until it's out because all that VPN, not able to spend stuff, seems like kind of a pain. But I am interested in the game. I think it seems cool, right? Like, I obviously think it's like kind of a cool thing. I'm a Pokemon fan, right? Like, everyone who grew up about the time I did has the same sort of memories of Pokemon Red and Blue and Gold and Silver. I realize that dates me. But yeah, like, I think that it probably will impact them more than we think. I don't think, though, that bad spotlights is indicative of them not thinking that. My take on like the spotlights or whatever being mediocre is like, I don't really think that would change a lot in terms of like whether or not it hits them or not. What I'm most worried about with Pocket is people leave Snap to go try Pocket, and then after a month or two they bounce off, and then they want to come back to Marvel Snap, but the catch-up mechanics are so ass that they aren't able to pick up where they left off. That's my big worry for Pokemon Pocket, is how does Marvel Snap get those players back if they bounce off a game which, like, by all reports has, like, relatively less competitive depth than the already fairly simple Marvel Snap, right? That's my worry, is that people will go play that game, and they'll, like, sort of, it'll run its course, as it will, and then they'll be like, oh man, I can't even go play Marvel Snap right now. It's been 3 months, and every card that matters right now costs 6,000 tokens. Oh, what am I supposed to do? And so I think that like between now and a month from now would be the optimal time for them to figure out what the hell to do about returning players, something that is an incredibly important aspect of this game that I feel like has very often gone overlooked. I'm not really worried about like, oh, the spotlight caches are crap. That means they don't think Pokemon Pocket is going to be an impact. I think that this would be the time to get a feature like that out. A feature focused on returning players and helping them get back into the game. The meta is at its best when Classic, Discard, and Destroy are viable and strong. The aim for balance should be those two decks to be near the top 5. Let's say 3 to 7 range. When they aren't in the discussion, I feel the meta is unbalanced. God, I actually agree with this so much. Like, I think Destroy should always be among the best decks in the game. I remember when people were talking about nerfing Destroy, and I hated it then. I am a huge fan of Destroy. I think when it is strong, the meta is good. It is a straightforward deck with a cool game plan, a bunch of very recognizable Marvel characters, Deadpool and Wolverine, Venom. Like, this is a super cool deck that does something fun, that builds up toward an explosive endgame, and is vulnerable to every tech card ever created. I personally am one of the biggest possible fans of Destroy being good. I actually agree with this 100%. They should add 2 more card slots to decks. It would be the biggest change to the game, and with so many new cards constantly being added, it allows for more new plays to be made, even if they added a game mode to see how it would play out. Okay, don't tell anyone, but I agree with you. I think that at some point, adding more card slots to decks would be a good thing. I genuinely do. I think that there is probably a number that makes sense, but I do think that there are so many cards in the current game that are designed around that 12 card constraint, and there would be many decks that would be hurt, and so making a move like that would not be the kind of thing that you could do lightly. I like your idea of a new game mode here. I think that that would be a great way to demo this. And I think that if they were interested in doing it, rolling it out as an event beforehand to see what the deck building looks like might be the right way to go. I do wonder if it just sort of gets rid of one of their core promises in too dangerous a way, right? Like, maybe they can make a card that you put it in your deck that lets you put more cards in your deck. I don't know. I know Hearthstone and Magic have both played around with this, with Magic having Yorion and with Hearthstone having a ETC, the one that like just is effectively 3 extra cards in your deck. Like, and also the Prince, right? Prince Renathal. I would be interested in a card like that in Marvel Snap, but I don't know how they'd be able to make the deck building UI work, and I think that would probably be the biggest challenge. The less decks a card fits into, the healthier the game is. Without restrictions from a color wheel, regions, or rotation, it's almost impossible to have a healthy balance as the card count balloons up. Narrowing the focus of cards allows there to be packages which can be balanced easier. True, but you have to understand what the goal of those packages are, right? Like, when we talk about the Thena package or the Move package, it's because those are the most efficient points packages, right? So making a card that's narrow but makes its package the most efficient points package, it may not look like it's pushing out that other stuff, but it is. When you ask about why people are playing Thena less, it's because people are playing other points packages as their primary points package, right? That's the real reason. And so these things aren't as non-fungible as you think. A lot of the time in Marvel Snap, like, Marvel Snap is a pretty simple game. You want numbers, right? And so I do agree that like having a different package be the default points package for these mid-range decks, that's probably a cool and good thing. It's why I like Scream. But it's not as straightforward as you might think here. Like, I think that on the whole, you're oriented in the correct direction, but there's a little bit more complexity to it than that. Because when this new card comes out, that's like, you know, it's not Thena but better, but like it's a competitor in the space of points. Like, let's say Scream came out and was just like super busted. Maybe she like, you know, was a 2/3 that got like 3 every time, right? That would be being played instead of Thena as your mid-range backbone package. And that would, even though it's not a competitor to Thena directly, reduce Thena's play rate. The acquisition system is just fine. The caches are an issue. We need better rewards from them, like more credits and tokens. People shouldn't worry about getting every card, just the ones that work with their decks. If they miss one, use tokens, otherwise save them. So this comment is making a mistake that I think is an easy mistake to make, which is the acquisition system. When people talk about the system, they don't just mean the caches and the tokens, they mean the numbers of the stuff that we get out of them. And I think that Marvel Snap's actions over the past however long that we've been doing this have indicated that they are happy with the current amount that we get. And that tweaks to the system will be not modifying the overall output of it, but rather just allowing it to maybe feel a little better in the future. Who knows? But they're not going to do stuff that take this system or the numbers that make it up and make it much more generous. They're just not going to do that. So when you say the system is fine, the numbers are bad, the numbers are part of the system because they have pegged the overall output. Like if you reduced the entirety of the system into like one number, they think that number is about right. And that is part of it when people talk about why the system is not good. They think that they are doing the right amount to make the game enticing, to make the cards feel unique, to make it feel like it's worth spending your money, and they think they're right about this. And I find it kind of hard to argue because of all the money they've made, but who knows what happens in the long term. And I think the long term is a reasonable concern, but ultimately, when people talk about the system, what they're talking about is also the inputs that create the system. They're not going to suddenly give us 4,000 tokens when we get a spotlight cash whiff. It's not going to happen. And that is part of the system. And I think that that should be understood when people talk about this. Like, it's not like this is a system that is in progress and they just need to bump up the values. I don't think they're going to bump up the values because the values being what they are is part of the system. All right, y'all, thank you so much. I tried to get this one a little bit more condensed. Let me know what you think. I've been KM Best. You have been phenomenal. As always, please remember to like and subscribe. Thank you so much for allowing me to do this on a daily basis. I am incredibly grateful, and I will see you in the next one.